When I first started martial arts, I was under this impression that size, strength, and athleticism didn't matter as long as you had better technique. And this is an idea that I think permeated in the martial arts because it fits the martial art fantasy that we all want. When you look at TV, cartoons, movies, the idea of the smaller guy being able to defeat these huge hulking muscular men is always the image we have in our head. And that kind of permeated throughout my childhood. And it wasn't until I started competing much later in life that I started recognizing how important athleticism and strength training and things like that actually are to making my martial art techniques effective to people of all sizes. And so I started doing some deep dive looks into history, trying to understand if this idea of, being almost weak but still being able to win through pure technique is something that martial artists truly believe throughout history. And what I've come to find is it definitely wasn't the case. As I started doing more research, I noticed that strength and conditioning has always been an extremely important part of all the martial cultures around the world. And that this idea of being weak and being weak being okay in as a martial artist is actually totally false when you look at the history of the arts. So in this episode of Strike Team Official, we're not just going to focus on karate in Japan. We're going to go around the globe and look at different ways different cultures use strength training to benefit their martial artists and soldiers. So let's start off with China, one of the most famous countries in the world for its martial arts. And let's look at I believe it's pronounced the Ma Bu in Chinese. I might have got that totally wrong, but the horse dance. Okay, and this is something that was made famous through, for me at least, Jackie Chan movies. In Drunken Master, he's sitting in that horse stance super deep and holding it for hours to strengthen his legs and his leg endurance. And this is a stance that is now used in multiple martial arts. You see it in Japan, you see it in Korea, you see it all over the place, just holding a horse stance to generate that leg strength, explosiveness, stability, and endurance. And again, this is something that goes back thousands of years and was used as a strength and conditioning method for the martial artists. Now, outside of the traditional horse stance that we often know, there's another standing training technique coming out of China called, I'm going to look at this, I'm probably going to mispronounce it, Zhan Zhuang. Okay, I know I butchered that. It comes from Qigong, often seen in like Tai Chi, where you're like standing out in a knees slightly bent, arms forward. You're supposed to be trying to release the tension in your body and staying up using your structure, right? But people can hold this for hours at high levels, and it is another really effective strengthening exercise, stability exercise, and also a structural exercise that's not as well known, but something that can be seen as a form of strength and conditioning coming from thousands and thousands of years ago. Now, China also had something called stone locks, and this is much more similar to what we recognize as strength and conditioning equipment now because they're just prototype kettlebells. You can use it for your arms, your chest, your shoulders, your tris, your bis, even your legs when you do it with squats. You can do fancy tricks with it. It is an extremely effective strength and conditioning tool that can be found in ancient China. Now, one of the less known training methods for building strength was the Taiji or Jingyi shaking spear, pole shaking or spear shaking. Okay, and this is where you take a long spear or a long pole and you do certain techniques with it where it uses the weight of the weapon to increase your forearm strength, your wrist strength, your grip strength, your tendon strength, your rotational ability, as well as it being a phenomenal full body workout because it starts with the floor. You have to be balanced in your feet and through your legs to shake the pole because the goal is to shake the pole, but for you not to shake. And that is an entire full body exercise. Everything has to be squeezing in the right way. And it's another phenomenal way to build strength, especially in smaller areas like tendons and stability muscles. Now, since we're talking about weapons and using weapons as a weight, let's talk about in the Qing Dynasty how they would use a giant dao, which is like this big pole with a blade at the top. And they would use weighted versions of this weapon as tests in their military officers program. So being able to pick up an extra heavy dao and a guandao and use that in a martial way by swinging it around, throwing it around your body, things of that nature, showing your strength and athleticism was actually used to help rank you. Now, normally these weapons weighed anywhere from 100 to 160 pounds. So I want you to think about that for a second. I want you to imagine going to a gym and picking up the barbell, which is normally just about 45 pounds. And then imagine having to swing that around like a martial art weapon and use it somewhat efficiently, right? Now imagine doubling that or tripling that and still doing it. A matter of fact, the heaviest guandao that I believe, still have, where is it? Yeah, it's in a museum in Shanghai, Guan. I know I mispronounced that too. But it is 183 pounds. 183 pounds. That's absolutely insane to think about using a weapon and practicing with a weighted weapon in that manner. So that is another great strength and conditioning exercise from China, and one that was actually used directly by the military for grading. For the next one, we're going to talk about a technique that is used in China, but is actually more famous for its use in Japan and karate, and that is the gripping jars. This is a technique used in multiple styles, especially my personal main style, Way to Do Karate, where you're gripping, you have these jars designed to be gripped by your fingers and raised up and carried whilst doing specific kata or movements to increase the strength of your body. The gripping jars are a great tool for martial arts that involve gripping, grabbing, and trapping, okay? Because it really helps increase your ability to hold on to somebody and create that tension when you're in a kind of a wrestling situation. And it is something that my specific style of karate, Way to Do, being very focused on gripping and grabbing, practices a lot. Now, another one that you can see on the Japanese and karate side is the chishi. Chishi. I'm going to pronounce everything wrong. This is usually a stick with a weighted end, usually a form of cement that they put at the end of the stick, sort of like a modern day steel mace, right? And this is another technique where you pick it up, move it around, and in these different positions for your arm, increase your elbow, the tendons in your elbow, your forearm, your wrist, your grip, all that kind of stuff. Like I said, modern day version of the steel mace. You can swing it around, good for rotations, and all this kind of full body workouts. Another great thing about this technique is stopping the weight as gravity is pulling it down, and like that ability to stop the rotational pressure is something that this is a very useful tool for, and something that's used by modern practitioners to this day if they're not just using a steel mace. Another grip strength and forearm tool used by karate practitioners is the wrist roller, okay, where you take a wooden stick, connect a string to it and a weight, and you just twist it and pull that weight up, right? And by doing that, you are strengthening your grip, your forearms, all those grabbing muscles. Once again, if you haven't gotten a very similar trend here, karate practitioners really like to work on those grabbing and gripping muscles. Speaking of the tools used to increase your gripping and forearm strength and things of that nature, it's a great time to think about India. Now, depending on who you ask, India is the progenitor of even Kung Fu, which would also make it the progenitor of karate. When you look at India and its history, they have a lot of strength and conditioning exercises that go back literally thousands of years. And the gada is one of those. It is the Indian mace. It is also the weapon of the Hindu god Hanuman, which is what actually the chishi got its inspiration from, and is the true progenitor to the iron mace. It can be found in Kalari Payattu, which is one of the oldest known martial arts on the planet. A true full body workout. This thing works all of your arm muscles, all of the tendons. When added in with squats and low stances, it even works your legs. It is a true full body workout. Now, when I started this video, I made a rule that I was going to try to not focus on calisthenics and focus on actual tools. However, I know I already broke that rule in the beginning with the Chinese horse stance, but I did that because the move is so iconic that I thought it would be almost ridiculous not to bring it up. But as I was doing my research, I found out that India actually created two techniques that I also find to be iconic, as they are two techniques I have had to do in pretty much every martial art class of every style I have ever done. Which in some ways means it's used even more than the horse stance. Like, I'm not doing the horse stance in Muay Thai class, but I have done these workouts in the Muay Thai class. And that is the Hindu push-up and the Hindu squat. Now, the Hindu squat is where you're going down, keeping your heels up off the ground and squatting down and then coming back up. And the Hindu push-up I've actually known it by multiple other names. I've known it as a dive bomber push-up, or even a Superman push-up, or a judo push-up. But the oldest known record of this push-up is actually from India. So I wanted to give them credit since these are two workouts that are very popular in the strength and conditioning world, especially the push-up. I see that everywhere. And something that I think they should have credit for, and a lot of people don't know that's where it came from. I actually found out that one of the greatest Indian wrestlers of all time, the great Gama, would do 4,000 squats before breakfast and 2,000 push-ups after every day, and he would increase that as he got better. And apparently by the time he was 50, he could still do 6,000 squats and 4,000 push-ups, which is absolutely insane. Much more than I can do. My butt needs to go start doing some push-ups. All right, now let's move to ancient Persia, a great empire of the Middle East, and talk about their training methods. Now, they used to have something called a house of strength, the name of which I'm not even going to try to pronounce. I'm going to type it below because I will so butcher it. But in there, they had two training methods that I found extremely interesting. And one was called the Song Shield. Okay, and this reminds me almost of, a chest press, but with two weighted shields in your hand. And they would do the chest press movement with it and other different kind of cool movements to work different parts of your chest and your arms. And this was used to help generate functional strength for when you're using a shield in battle. This is taking a piece of military equipment, making it heavier, and making workouts out of it. And if you haven't noticed, this is a very consistent theme throughout all of history. This is also something the Persians did with the bow and arrow with something called the kabadeh. Sorry again if I'm butchering this. I'm sure someone in the comments will let me know. Okay, but this is a chain bow. Imagine a bow and arrow, but instead of the normal string, it's just made of chains or has metal slabs on it to weigh it down, and you have to swing it around your body in all these fancy ways to increase your shoulder strength, your back muscles, and the muscles used hopefully to pull your bow and arrow, okay, to increase that upper body strength. And this is something that Persians used in this house of strength to train their archers, to train their soldiers, and to make them more efficient for battle. Okay, so now we're going to go over to ancient Greece and Rome. Okay, and you'd be surprised for a culture that created the Olympics. I expected more than what I found when I started doing some research here. Because a lot of ancient Greek and Roman exercises were very body on body. I'm talking about wrestling, picking each other up, carrying each other, things of like calisthenic and body weight style exercises. In my head, I thought they'd be out here having created a barbell, but I was wrong. Many of the Greek techniques were as simple as picking up heavy stones and throwing them, walking around with them, like I said, wrestling. And when it comes with the military, a lot of weighted pack marches, like going on a march with all of your heavy equipment and just marching and practicing and getting that endurance from that, carrying extra stuff in your pack, and really just developing strength in those ways. However, they did have something called a halter, which is a prototype kettlebell. Like I said, when something works, you find it everywhere. From what I found, the prototype kettlebell seems to have been like the earliest version of a weight that you can find in almost every culture. One interesting thing is that gladiators were known to fight with weighted weapons. That could be a wooden sword that's heavier than a real sword, or a wooden shield that's heavier than the shield they would use in actual combat. Gladiators often trained weighed down to increase their strength, stamina, and endurance. Now, medieval Europe also used a lot of similar techniques as Greece and Rome, as they were very influenced by those cultures, and a lot of wrestling and grappling and things of that nature. But I do want to take a second to really point out the stone lifting, specifically from Northern Europe, because it is a art form that is now being used in a lot of strongman competitions, and something that I think is very cool. And it's where they pick up these huge, massive weighted stones and just like kind of have to pick them up off the floor, and they're huge and round. And it's some of the most insane stuff I've ever seen. The most famous stone for lifting is over 400 pounds, which is so heavy I can't even fathom being able to pick that up. While this isn't the most precise version of, a workout, especially for martial arts, it's just general strength, not much can beat a guy who can pick up 400 pounds and can just like grab you and throw you over his shoulder. Not much can beat that when it comes to fighting. Now, because this video is already probably too long, I don't want to bore you with repetition, because a lot of countries and a lot of different cultures use very similar methods. I don't want to bore you with that. But I also know I missed a lot of very unique things, specifically around China and Japan, because I know those off the top of my head. I know I skipped a lot of stuff. And I'm sure there's many, many other areas from all over the world that we could get into and talk about. For example, I didn't go over Africa because a lot of Africa stuff is very similar to what we've already covered in other cultures, but they also did stone throwing. They would use weighted weapons, things of that nature as well in different African communities. So if this interested you and you want me to go into a deeper dive of some of these cultures, go and find more unique methods of strengthening and conditioning, want me to expand a little bit, like I said, I know I didn't go deep into Africa. I didn't go into Native America very much because they are very similar. If you want me to go over there, if you want me to just go deeper into China or Japan or India or whatever, let me know. I would love to go and do that research for you and bring you guys that information because this is stuff that I'm interested in and I do for fun anyway. So yeah, I hope you guys liked the video. We do a lot of stuff like this. We do history. We do actual martial art application, kata and form application. Uh, we do reaction stuff, all things kind of martial art we try to do here. We do normally stay around the karate-ish side because I am a karate practitioner first, as well as a Muay Thai and kickboxer. But I love all martial arts and am willing to study all of it or get an expert on to kind of share their view from an expert opinion. So yeah, again, please like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Please sidekick the notification bell, okay? Or you will not get it. Go and find the videos you're gonna watch from the subscriber feed, not the main feed, or you're gonna miss me because I'm a very tiny channel, okay? I don't have a lot of subscribers, so please help me out. Share it with your friends. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed, and talk to you next time. Peace.